Hey, Christy here from Looming Crafty Fiber Arts. Today I want to show you how to loom knit the Fluted Rib Stitch. The Fluted Rib Stitch is a 4-row repeat. It needs to be worked on an even pegged loom divisible by 2. And it is a flat panel application for any flat panel you want to do. This stitch is textured. I did a cast on of garter. I wasn't really happy with it, so use any cast on you want, any bind off or cast off you want. Also, I did turning pegs where I slipped a stitch on the end for a chain edging, and I'm not really happy with it, and I've not really played with it to see what other kind of border it would need. It doesn't curl, so it doesn't have to have a border, but to frame the stitch and make it look more neat, I think it needs a border. And this was done on my 24 peg 3/8 gauge Cindywood loom with a number 3 DK weight of yarn. And that's what I'm going to be using today. Same weight of yarn, same loom, and I'm going to be using 10 pegs to show you how to do this stitch. Now let's get started with a stitch, and it is for row 1. We are coming from, I've done my cast on. We're coming from peg 1 from behind. We're going to take our working yarn. We're going to wrap around the back. First of all, we're going to move our stitches down just a little bit. We need a little extra room. We're going to come from the back, and we're going to wrap around one time. It's like a big E-wrap. You're going to be doing this in 2 pair sets for row 1. Then you're going to come around and wrap around again. So now you have 3 loops wrapped around the first 2 pegs, okay? And now we're going to move our stitches back up just a little bit. Alright, we're going to knit from the bottom loop over the top 2 loops where you wrapped around on both pegs. So knit and knit, okay? So it should look like this. And then we're going to pull our yarn in front between those 2 pegs. And it really helps to have a sharper loom hook like this one to do this, especially if you're working more with thinner yarn. And we're going to kind of divide these up. You don't have to mess with this one over here. But this second one, we're going to kind of divide those 2 loops. We're going to scoop down on that bottom loop. I'm going to leave the first loop alone. We'll scoop down on that bottom loop, and we're going to purl that bottom loop only. Pull up our working yarn, create that new loop, and then we're going to scoop underneath where we just created that new loop. We're going to pull up over top of that first loop, and we're going to put our loop back on, which is a purl. So now we're coming from peg 3, going to peg 4 and 5. We're coming from behind, and see now we have 2 loops still on each peg. So we're coming from behind. We're going to push our loops down so we have room. We'll wrap around one time, wrap around a second time. Don't wrap them too tight. And then we're going to come up a little bit. Just push it up with your hook if you want to. Knit 1, knit the second one, pull your yarn in front, push those loops up close to the top. Be easier to get them over your peg. Scoop down, separate your loops, scoop down on that bottom loop, grab your working yarn, pull up, because you're purling, that's all you're doing. You're just purling the bottom loop and leaving the top loop alone. Pick that bottom part up, stick it behind your peg just like you do a regular purl stitch. Stick your new loop back on just like you do a regular purl. Okay, once again, 1, 2, push those loops back up, knit that peg, knit that peg. And they're going to separate these 2 a little bit so we can see our peg through it. Scoop down on that bottom loop, pull your working yarn up. You see how that sharp tip helps you out? Pull that loop up, purl. Same here. 1, 2. Remember I said don't wrap too tight. Knit, knit. Yarn in between the 2 pegs and toward you in front. Separate those 2 loops, scoop down the bottom loop, pull your working yarn up, over, behind, put your loop back on. And then I'm just going to U-wrap because I'm just showing you this is not part of the pattern. The U-wraps are not part of the pattern. The pattern starts where the green peg starts and down here. So this is just turning pegs. Okay? You can do any border you want for it. Now, second row, going back the other way. That was row 1, this is row 2. We're going to knit 1, purl 1. So we're going to E-wrap. When I say knit, I'm saying E-wrap knit stitch. Now if you don't want to, the closer you have these loops up close to the top of your peg, the easier it's going to be to get both of them over at one time. If you don't want to or they're too tight, you can do 1 loop at a time like this. Knit both those loops. Then the second one, we're going to purl both loops as 1. So you're knitting both loops as 1, you're purling both loops as 1. So here we go again. Knit, E-wrap knit stitch. See, that's a little tight. See my peg bend in there? So you might want to do 1 loop at a time. It doesn't matter either way. I just don't want you to harm your loom. And so here we go again. We're going to knit off 1, knit off 2, and then purl the second peg. So knit 1, purl 1, knit 2 as 1 with E-wrap knit stitch, purl 2 as 1, knit, E-wrap knit stitch, knit both loops off, and then purl both loops as 1. And then I'm just doing the U-wrap, and that's row 2. Row 3, we're going to do all purl overs. So to do a purl over, you're going, for me, what I usually do with a purl over, I E-wrap. The original is a flat panel, but I do an E-wrap most of the time. So we're going to E-wrap around our first peg, skip up from the bottom, grab that first loop, pull it down, and flip it over the peg and snug it up a little bit. You don't want it too tight, because the purl over, if you get it too tight, it's hard to flip over the next row. So you don't want to snug it up too much. So we're going to do a purl over again, and we're going to come from this peg, go around from behind the next one, do an E-wrap, scoop up from the bottom, pull that top loop down, flip it over, and notice that I have my yarn between my middle finger and my pointer finger, and I've not got it too tight. And I'm going to just slightly, with my thumb and my middle finger, snug it up. Okay? Now sometimes you might find that your yarn kind of might depend on what kind of loom you're using. Especially I've noticed this with some KB looms. Not the newer KB, but some of the older KB looms that has the white pegs or off-white pegs. Sometimes the yarn will kind of try to slip off. If it does that, put your hand down like this toward the inside of the loom when you get ready to flip it over, and it won't pop off. So we're going around again, and we're going to purl over all our pegs on this row. And this is row 3. Remember, this is a 4-row repeat. And I lost my yarn. Okay. And I'm going to U-wrap that last peg. Okay. Now I'm going to slip this going back the other way. We are going to, again, knit 1, purl 1. So we're going to E-wrap. When I say knit, we're going to do the E-wrap knit stitch, purl. We got single loops now on our pegs. We're going to knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. Okay, so that is the fluted rib stitch.